Hi, everyone. It is great to have you joining us tonight. Today's Thursday, January 21st, 2021, season 2 of In the Director's Chair, where my name, Joel Ivany, and we're going to talk to different people involved in the arts who have opinions on the arts. And before we get started into season 2 and our first guest, I just want to mention that Against the Grain Theater, we are on Treaty 13. And this is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I've learned a lot over the last 3 months, 8 months, 2 years about what land means to Canadians, to myself, and just grateful to be able to be here and share this and make art on this land. Again, thank you for joining me tonight. It's going to be a fun one where we're going to talk about different things, art, the pandemic, how to create. My guest tonight is a New York Times best-selling author. He's a former English professor at Yale and is also a recipient of a National Book Critics Circle Award. His most recent book here, The Death of the Artist: How Creators Are Struggling to Survive in the Age of Billionaires and Big Tech, is the topic of today's chat. It's great to have William Deresiewicz here with me. William, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So just off the bat, kind of quickly, where are you checking in from today?
Portland, Oregon. Rainy.
Nice.
Lefty.
Yeah, exactly. And for everyone who's curious, how is the pandemic situation there? We're in a lockdown, emergency lockdown in Toronto right now. How are sort of going for a walk or buying groceries in Portland right now?
We can go for a walk and buy groceries with precautions. I think we're still in an emergency that started towards the end of last year in terms of indoor dining and stuff. Oregon and Portland have been one of the best states in the country. We've been lucky, but we're all still cautious and taking it very seriously. I think that's why it's been one of the best states.
Good. Very good to hear. Well, let's kind of dive right into this. How did you, and you can mention sort of how the creation of this book, which was done before the pandemic, but kind of now incredibly related to it. But how did you come about writing this book? Right.
I mean, it sort of gathered together a variety of different things that I was thinking about that, we might touch on. But fundamentally, I wrote it because I wanted to answer a question for myself. I'd been hearing for years about this wonderful, never been a better time to be an artist, sort of internet economy situation. This idea that Silicon Valley puts out, that because you have immediate access to the audience because of the internet, because you have production tools, your camera, your laptop, music, film, whatever, there's never been a better time to be an artist. Of course, artists, musicians especially, but lots of different artists were saying something else, which is you can put your stuff online, but no one's going to pay you for it, or they're going to pay you so little that you're not going to be able to make a living. I didn't write the book to figure out which story was true. It seemed obvious to me that the artist's story was true. For one thing, I trusted them more, and it made sense. I wrote it to figure out how people were making art, or how people were making a living making art, given that the artist's story is true. So, I mean, it's that first sentence, the first word of the subtitle, how. How are people managing to survive? Is it as bad as it sounds? Yeah, it's pretty damn bad. What are the strategies people are using? It's impossible to generalize. Maybe we'll get into it. I have a lot of individual portraits of half a dozen artists from each of the categories: music, visual art, writing, film and television. So everybody's story is different, but there are certainly common themes.
Well, that's what's kind of incredible is you didn't sort of just theorize or anything. You conducted, I believe it's 140 phone interviews or interviews with individual artists.
Yes. Long, in-depth, free-flowing interviews. Yes.
And I guess almost all of them were fairly consistent except for sort of one industry per se. Is that correct-ish?
Say that, I didn't understand the question.
I guess like all of your ideas other than perhaps the television industry.
Oh, I see. Yeah, TV. Why is TV flourishing? Because there's a lot of money in TV. Why is there a lot of money in TV? Because we, the audience, still pay for it. At least in America. Apparently the Canadians are pretty bad at piracy, because you're so close to us that you see that we get things first. There's those Canadian documentarians in Winnipeg in my book, and they told me that. They were one of the profiles. They said, oh yeah, it's really bad. But I'm sure you also still pay your cable bill and Netflix subscription, stuff like that. So we're paying a lot of money for it. That's the difference, right? It's not a mystery.
Yeah.
If somehow somebody manages to enable us to get free television the way, I mean, really in a copious way, like Napster was with music, that's going to go away, that golden age of TV.
And it kind of ties into this next question about how perhaps COVID has affected thoughts around ideas around your book. But I guess like one of the big things that you bring about, which, you know, when you stop and think about it, there's a generation who, at least a generation now, if not more, who kind of accepts that music is free, that you go to Apple Music and you can listen to anything you want. So why on earth would I pay for that? And with all these arts organizations going online, including our own company, is there a danger that we're going to be doing the exact same thing for film, for arts films, and specifically perhaps?
Yes. So the book went to press just before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, I started tracking it. What was it doing to the people I had interviewed? What was it doing to the arts economy? Partly because I wanted to, and I hope to write about it, which I have done, and a piece should be coming out in the April issue of Harper's Magazine that I just finalized. So sort of late March, it'll come out. But also because I recognized from having done the book that this was actually going to be even worse than people think, people outside of the arts, because everybody understands that theaters have shut down. Okay. But what they don't understand is the following. Starting with Napster, 1999, but then YouTube, video, text, still images, content has been demonetized, right? The price of content has been driven to zero or near zero. Anything that can be digitized. So artists, what did I find out by doing the book? That artists have, as much as possible, shifted their revenue streams to things that can't be digitized. That means physical objects and live events. But it mainly means live events. They're more lucrative, and also a lot of physical objects get sold through live events. So a typical emerging band will play 200 dates a year if they can. Authors make a lot of their money by giving talks and classes and workshops, and the same thing with visual artists. Live events have become the main pillar of the arts economy for the individual artist. All of that is gone. So the Authors Guild in the United States did a survey in May, 2 months into the pandemic, of its members. 60%, this is authors now, right? Authors are not supposed to be performers or live anything. 60% had seen a loss of income, and the average loss was 43%.
Man.
Okay? And the main reasons for it were loss of live events, and also a decline in freelance fees, because another thing that's happened is that as business declines, advertising spending declines, and therefore magazine and newspaper journalism, there's less freelance work. It just ripples out. I mean, the ripples get wider and wider. So to actually answer your question, people have talked to me about the live stuff they're doing. Suddenly, every artist had to become a videographer and a video producer, and theater companies and dance companies and everybody, visual artists, everything's going online now, either pre-recorded or live. The question is, can you get anybody paying for it? And the answer is, it's really hard. It's really hard, first of all, because of this expectation of free that are pre-existed. Second of all, because when people first jumped online in March and April, they did things for free, including a lot of prominent musicians, for morale, to keep the audience engaged, to keep themselves engaged. It was understandable. But again, the expectations were set. This is going to be free. We're not going to charge you. So now it's really hard for people to get money. I mean, basically, they just ask for donations. And I understand you guys have been successful. I talked to one musician who's been managing to keep it together, doing one concert a month. But even he said he's not going to keep being able to do this every month. And other people are just not getting anything.
And that it's not like when things, and I guess we kind of chatted a bit about this, Bill, but it's not that things will improve. There's hope that things will improve. I think everyone's hoping that as soon as everyone's vaccinated, that it will just go back to this idea of thriving. But it's not like it was necessarily thriving before the pandemic as well.
It wasn't thriving at all before the pandemic. No. And listen, everyone, I think not just in the arts, but certainly everyone in the arts, in all the arts that I've talked to people, including theater, dance, have been talking about a reset. This is our chance to really think about how things should be. And that's great. And people are doing different things and organizing, activists organizing in new ways. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And things could end up getting worse if more stuff happens online and people aren't paying for it. And there's an expectation that it'll happen online, that's worse. The tech platforms, which are really at the root of the problem, the tech companies, got 50% bigger in 2020. Big techs, big five, got 50% bigger. So we're going to have to, and yes, when we finally can go out again, people, I think, will be dying for live theater. And every person who does live performance is going to want to be out on the road or in a theater at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm actually, can I just say, I'm going to be on CBC Sunday Morning. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I think this Sunday, and it starts with a clip that they had pre-recorded from a Canadian artist, Mulholland, I forget her first name, Melissa or something, Merlinda. And she said exactly that, what I just said. Everyone's going to be trying to do it.
And they're all going to be sort of saying, come see me, come see me. And and how long will that go? And I think the one thing with this is, I guess it's a fine line in terms of, it's important to be hopeful and hope that we will do this, but it's also a sense of reality and sort of that pragmatism of, this isn't going to be something that is easy, and it won't be like money's flowing once everyone's vaccinated.
Well, like you said, best case scenario is that it goes back to the way it was before. The way it was before was really not good. I mean, I think there are cross-border differences in terms of cost of living because you have universal health care and because of government arts support. But I've talked to people from Canada. I've heard from people in Canada since the pandemic, as I'm promoting the book. You have many of the same issues. Primarily the ones we've already been talking about, which is, the internet is everywhere. It's the same in every country. And the internet is the root of the problem.
And that's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's not.
When you talk about sort of the definition of an artist, has our opinion changed on what that means to be an artist? In sort of thinking in specifically, even in operatic sense, we have this idealistic, fantasy-driven idea of the poor, starving artist. But is that perhaps almost a bleak reality, sort of that to kind of barely afford food? There's this romanticism, but then there's also, that's no way to live at the same time.
No, actually, I disagree with this. I mean, and this is an important point, and it was one of the early realizations that set me on the path to the book, or at least kind of the theoretical understructure, where I have that one section where I talk about the history of how artists have supported themselves, but also, therefore, their relationship to society. Not to make a big meal out of this, but, we didn't used to talk about artists the way we do now, artists with a capital A. In the Renaissance and before, really everything up to and including the Renaissance, artists were artisans. The words, by no coincidence, are the same. We didn't talk about genius. We didn't talk about solitary, heroic artists. Then we get into the 18th century and Romanticism and modernism, and you start to have this stereotype of the starving artist because the artist enters the market. And now everybody can do it. There's no longer a monopoly from the guilds and academies. And that's a real thing, the starving. That was a real thing. It was also the rise of this idea, so we moved from artisan to bohemian. A bohemian was someone who deliberately kept themselves on the margin of society because they did not want their art to be consumed or tainted by the market. And this is the ideology that still governs the way we think about artists. I think it produced lots of terrific art. I mean, modernism was the great age of bohemianism. But it was possible because you could live cheaply. You could live cheaply, and therefore you could spend most of your time making your art and just a little bit of time working or sponging off your friends. And that went all the way. That went certainly well into the 20th century. But after the war, a new paradigm, a new model emerged, where we started to build all of these institutions. Opera, ballet, symphony, theater, national arts councils and funding bodies and private foundations, and artists started to be hired at universities. And it became the case, well, artists became professionals. There are always a lot of artists who don't make very much money. They're young and starting out. They're not good. Or they're really great, but their vision is just so strange that people can't get with it. But for the typical serious working artist who establishes himself in the field, produces regularly, maybe has institutional affiliations, gets an audience, gets the respect of their peers and critics, they don't have to be a big star. But that mid-tier artist, that was a middle-class job description in the decades after World War II, all the way to the end of the 20th century. That's changed because of the internet and because of other factors as well, like cost of living. On both sides of the border, that means housing costs, especially in places like Vancouver or Toronto. And the destruction, the degradation of those institutions because of the pressure that the internet has put on their business models, publishers, labels. So now we're somewhere else, and that mid-tier artist is once again a starving artist, a barely getting by, hand-to-mouth, working-class artist. And that's disastrous. That's not romantic, okay? It doesn't make you a better artist to be stressed out or hungry or not have time for your art.
You beautifully say, and I'm just going to quote a part of the book. Many of the profiles in this book portray artists living in extreme frugality, often in cramped quarters, as you were kind of saying, in smaller cities or towns, because you can't afford to live in the big cities, compelled to spend much of their time on day jobs and side hustles. And not surprisingly, as one observed, most people burn out after 10 years.
That's not from my book, but it is a paraphrase of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And essentially, like, who is that? Is that the artist, another sort of not coined term, but a part-time amateur versus a professional who does sort of many different things? I guess that's a new thing that's kind of come about in our industry in terms of you shouldn't hide the fact that you have many jobs as well as the one art that you do. And yeah, is this something that will eventually kind of burn those people out, or from what you've studied and sort of by all these people you've interviewed?
Okay, so it's absolutely the case that many, what I call serious artists, or I call them real artists. I don't care if people have a problem with that. People who are dedicated to their art, people who've always wanted to do this. This is the center of their life. They think about it all the time. They know the history of their art and have respect for it. They're reluctant to call themselves artists because that word means so much to them. It's very typical for those people not to make art full time and to have day jobs or all kinds of sort of ancillary jobs within the arts. Maybe they work at a museum or a nonprofit or something like that, or they teach. That's totally fine. I mean, fine. It doesn't, in my view, make them not artists. It can lead to burnout. I mean, it depends. See, part of the internet thing is that you have to, you're now a one-man band. You're a single person small business. So making your art is only half of your job. And maybe then you have your day job, and then you have this whole other job, which is managing your artistic career. You're the producer. You are the accounting department. You are especially the publicity department. You are on 6 different platforms. You're on Patreon, and you're trying to put out material all the time to keep your audience engaged. That's the model I discovered, this constant audience engagement. You know, I talked to a woman who had never touched an implement before age 33. She self-educated as an artist and illustrator. She built a successful business doing it, 6 figures, and she burned out hard. And she basically collapsed after about 10 years. She was putting stuff on Instagram every day. She was making art to put on Instagram every day. So there's that. And we can also talk about everyone's an artist and sort of the ideology of the amateur, but that's in some sense a separate issue.
And I guess like this, is it false hope, this idea that if we just seek representation, if I get someone who will just do half that work for me, who will hustle for me, who will be on my team, is that false hope, or is that sort of a step towards, in this industry, a lot of singers are sort of saying, as long as I get an agent, then I'm that much closer to having a full-time career. Whereas I'm not sure if that's necessarily the next step. I think the bigger question is, can we support all the artists that are wanting to have a career in this industry?
Well, listen, that's always a question. I mean, it's always been a question. It's certainly a question now. The truth is that the old model, the old culture industry pre-internet has not disappeared. There are still labels and publishers and opera companies, and there's still agents and managers. And I really didn't I talked to a lot of DIY artists who were managing to make it. I talked to very, very few who didn't hope that they could have an agent or a manager, a publisher or a label. If you can get it, then it's very helpful. It's
right.
Not the answer. It's not like you lean back at that point. It's just getting it is really, really hard. And I should also say, I mean, I don't know about opera in particular, but certainly in publishing and in music and in other fields, those people expect you to do more and more of the work. All, you know, they still do a lot, but like the amount of publicity that an author has to do for their book is much, much more than it was 30 or 40 years ago.
There's a question that came in from someone who's watching, and it kind of relates specifically to opera, but I think you'll be able to generalize what it is. And it's kind of, out of all the research you've done with all the people you've spoken to and seen, what would be either your top 3 or top recommendations to a young opera singer as a result of your findings?
Listen, first of all, I'm sorry to have to say this, but I didn't really deal with the performing arts as much because I was specifically interested in the kinds of creators who especially are affected by the internet. It was also partly just a need to limit the research. So I don't really feel qualified very much. I will say that one thing, certainly I did see this with actors, right? Because I talked to people who do film and television, and some of them were actors. And a lot of actors have realized, like, if you want a role, you need to write it for yourself. If you want to be in a movie, you need to make it yourself. So I think there's a lot more of that. How possible that is in the opera world, I have no idea. Other than that, this is, I hate to say this, but keep your expenses low. Everybody said this to me, even people who started to make some money. Keep your expenses low, because it's always feast or famine in the arts.
I think that you bring up a good point, though. I think that what we were seeing in, especially the pandemic, was, like you said, everyone became a producer. Everyone was producing their own concerts. I was seeing singers who I hadn't seen, and artists and actors in years, all of a sudden, almost daily or weekly, putting out their own shows. And there's no saying what could happen when one finds that, but that's sort of, I don't want to say a lottery, but it's kind of, you can't expect that will translate into work, but it certainly doesn't hurt to know what the game kind of is in terms of online content, online producing.
Yeah, and both in terms of what it can get you directly, but also it's a way of getting yourself noticed and getting attention from people who might employ you, for their project. Let me actually say one more thing that's also relevant to everybody, and this really came up especially in the pandemic. I talked to a young visual artist in Boston who lost many of her sources of support, but she's managed to pivot. She's still only making half of what she did before the pandemic, but she's very positive about it. And the way she pivoted is, and found other things to do in her art, in the arts, is she said, I looked at what I really took an inventory of the skills that I have. Not just making visual art, but I've been teaching. I know how to organize a project. All kinds of things. She said the artists, her friends who haven't been doing well, have not been doing that and don't understand that they need to do it. She taught herself how to teach a class online. She's given herself a lot of new skills as well. So what are my old skills? What are my new skills? And how can that translate into the market, as a consultant, as a teacher, as whatever? Both in terms of those ancillary things that can help support you while you're doing your art, and also, young opera singer, big theme that came up. You get to the point, usually around your mid-30s, where you just haven't gotten as far as you need to. Maybe you have had some success, but it's transient, or it's still not making you a lot of money, and you're 35. You don't have as much energy as you used to. Maybe you just had a kid. Maybe you want to have a kid. You get to a point where you have to decide if you want to keep doing this, because if you're going to have a plan B and give up the dream, you don't want to wait too much longer. I want to say that that's a completely legitimate choice. There's a lot of shame involved and a lot of regret, but it can be as hard of a choice to not be an artist as it was to become an artist. But you should know that you might need to get to that point, and that's okay. But I also think you should give yourself your shot in the meantime.
I think that's an important reminder, that give yourself a shot, that if that's what you feel driven to do, that you do that. But that there's also, it's not a shameful thing to sort of say, I can't survive on this.
That's right. And
I need to do what's best for myself. So I think that's good. And also, as you said, the artist as a producer, that's probably here to stay as well. That's not going away anytime soon. And if anything, we need to hustle the administrative more than ever before. Another comment that someone just asked, two actually. One is about, do you think universal basic income, which is being talked about in Canada, obviously during the pandemic, that was a big issue that came about. What are your thoughts on basic income and its potential?
Yeah, I think it would be great for artists. I really do. I think even more than when I wrote the book. I don't believe that the government should just fund everybody to do their art just because people want to. But we can talk about that. And I don't think that public funding should be the only source of support for the arts. But I absolutely think basic income would make a huge difference.
That's good to hear. And was there anything surprising or unexpected that you learned upon writing this book and by speaking to all these incredible people?
Yeah. Let me say two things quickly, because I know we're getting to the end of our time. First of all, I went into the book with that kind of romantic attitude that art and money shouldn't touch, that you're a sellout if you think about money. And my early interviews quickly disabused me of that. And I think that it's really important to be candid and not embarrassed about the fact that artists need money to survive. They shouldn't apologize about it, about getting paid, about asking to get paid. And the other thing, I went in with tremendous admiration and respect for artists, for their talent and their hard work. What I discovered doing the interviews is all the other qualities of character that artists need to have that were just incredibly impressive. Just the toughness, the perseverance, the resilience in the face of rejection, the single-minded dedication, and also the generosity of spirit. not only in respect to the audience, but in respect to other artists. I think, and I say this as someone who definitely doesn't consider himself an artist, I think artists are truly special people. I think your brains are different than the rest of us, and I think the character, I mean, the artist who actually makes it 10 or 20 years into of necessity, your character has to also be unusual because it's so difficult.
That's an incredible reminder and champion, especially to those who hear both sides and sort of are unsure. They're either motivated by it and sort of say, I will prove you wrong and fight, or they're contemplative. And my goodness, this pandemic has certainly brought sort of an awareness to that. Bill, I'm so thankful. We could keep going on and on about this, but this has been really good to have you here to sort of get your commentary on this, because I know from every sort of young artist and mid-career artist that I've spoken to, this is on their mind, and it's an important issue, not just for obviously the performing arts, but every sort of artistic industry going there. Do you have one final thought before we wrap up?
No, I think I already shot all my important bullets, the things that I really wanted to get across.
Good. Well, I strongly encourage everyone to, if you can, The Death of the Artist, William Deresiewicz. It's an important read, and one that I hope you will take it upon yourself to buy, to read, and support William and the arts. Even though he says he's not an artist, he's a writer, and so I qualify that as an artist. Okay. Will, thanks for chatting, and thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was William Deresiewicz. It's wonderful to have him to talk to, and thank you for tuning in to listen to this. We will have more artists coming up, but want to give out a plug for Against the Grain's Messiah Complex. It has been extended. It's available on demand for free. It was a wonderful kind of poignant talk after today's talk, but visit atgtheater.com. It's streaming for free, and it's available till the end of the month. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a good night.